Hello and welcome to another episode of Beyond Day Zero. This episode was recorded during the time when the COP26 talks were going on in Glasgow, and it's all about living alongside the difficulties that the existential crisis that is climate change, biodiversity, the global inequality, all those things wrapped up together, what that does to us as individuals. And how we might suffer from that and what we can do about it. It's something that I've really wanted to talk about for a while. And I think it's really, really vital that we do share conversations like this. So please, if you know someone who might be interested in this conversation, when you've listened to it, please do share a link and pass it on. The conversation was with Martin Wilks, who is part of the Climate Psychology Alliance, and they're a brilliant organisation. And if you look them up online, they are offering 3 free counselling sessions where you can talk through your own experiences of living alongside the climate crisis. So they're a really good resource. They're trying to do more and more outreach work and trying to get these conversations into our communities wherever we live. Look them up. You can find out more information about them. For now, though, let's get on to the chat that myself and Martin recorded a couple of weeks ago. Thanks again, Martin. I really do appreciate you making the time to have this conversation with me. It's an area that I wanted to make sure that I covered on a, regular might be too frequent a word, but that we dip into now and again while I do the podcast. So I'm really interested and have been since I had mental health problems of my own in that area, and how we can live alongside them, any sort of symptoms that we get largely, or learn to live better with them. I think the second episode of the podcast was with a good friend of mine who I actually met through running, but it turned out that we both had been a user of the same mental health service and went on to work with them on a volunteer basis. And he's that was a really good conversation. But I'm also very personally aware that living at this time with the huge sort of existential crises that we face has an impact on us. And as someone who's involved in activism, I can recognize the intensity of the peaks and troughs of that. And so all that is kind of as the basis for me wanting to make sure, and much more, the basis for wanting me to make sure that we include conversations around the issue. So we're not just talking about the detail of the things that we need to change or consumerism or environmental issues, but we talk about the personal impact that it has on us as well, and recognize that is very much a thing. So
good.
So perhaps so I found out about the Climate Psychology Alliance, I hope I've said that correctly.
Yes,
which I know you're a part of. I found out about them on the back end of attending Extinction Rebellion protests. I through the material that they distributed, I found out about the fact that the Climate Psychology Alliance were now offering 3 free sessions to people. But perhaps you could explain better than I what I just tried to, in terms of what that group is and who its sort of members are and why that's come about.
I was trying to remember how long it was since I first made contact, but I think it was through a training that they were offering, and it was the first time I'd seen a training in the psychology world that was directed towards climate change. I can't quite remember the name of the training itself. I found it refreshing. It was a different. It was such an alliance of different approaches, but at that time was quite. I think quite Jungian based, as in, speaking, using the power of metaphor and archetypes to give some framing to, as you describe, the oncoming existential crisis. And I've been relatively, quite a quiet and on the edge member. I've been to a few trainings and sort of been actively involved at that level. But the email list is a rich source of materials for me to dip into almost on a daily basis, really. And as the list serve has grown and grown with people from different different traditions, and I'm glad to say that I think I've contributed to its growth through other psychological orientated organisations that I've been involved with, and indeed some mindfulness teacher organisations that I know when I've done workshops in that area. I've mentioned Climate Psychology Alliance, and I've later seen people there as well. So it's a great focus, I think, for networking, and a good organisation to point people towards. And there's a real richness in the email exchanges and the sharing of resources that I can both contribute to from time to time, but also use as a source to put out in the other forums that I work with as a psychologist.
Yeah. So what's your background? What have you particularly felt that you've um brought to the party?
Yeah. Not sure how much I've brought to the CPA party as such. The more diverse the sources, it's harder to say what the central
Yeah.
what the central core is. It's just building momentum beautifully. Um, but my background, first of all. Psychologically speaking, I suppose, is through therapy and through one-to-one, originally through peer therapy, I suppose, through co-counselling, a kind of community learning based means of helping each other with personal development by just taking it in turns to be facilitator and speaker, and then swapping around,
Yeah.
and then getting involved in the person-centered approach to psychotherapy, the idea that we provide the right conditions, and human beings have something that you call the self-actualizing potential, that if you give them the right listening conditions, they get in touch with the direction they need to go. And the work of Carl Rogers, really,
Yeah.
which was, in my understanding at the time, was an antidote to the behavioristic means of working, of kind of behavior change psychotherapy. So it's intriguing in a way for me that through a parallel fascination with the mindfulness approach, working really with mind training and the awareness perspective and attitudes of curious acceptance and accommodation of our inner challenges. I came across acceptance and commitment therapy, which is a behavior change therapy, but it has a lot of mindfulness in it and has a lot of person-centered attitude in it as well. So for me, that's become quite a place to integrate those different approaches. And so when I think about bringing psychology now to the table at this real point of existential realization, collectively speaking, now at long last, after 30 years of climate activism. It's an odd thing that, in a way, the denial, the collective denial has been transcended to the extent that we're right in the middle of COP26, and the naysayers have hardly a voice to be heard, which is kind of refreshing. But of course, the actuality of human behaviour change is hardly in sight as yet, and so bringing the science of human behaviour change to the table is really important, and that's where I feel my contribution lies. And it's with a different organisation as such, but I'm bridging and networking. It's all a part of it, really. The science, the world of science is so siloed. And to an extent, the world of therapy, psychotherapy, can be very siloed as well. And there's a narrowness to those silos, and to an extent, the more expertise people get within their silos, the harder it is to broaden out from there. And I think the times and the situation demand that we do broaden out from our comfortable silos, really, and go with humility to meet other approaches. And not only, I mean, when I talk about other psychological approaches, not just meaning the approaches to formal mental health approaches, but the psychology of indigenous peoples, the Ubuntu of the African nations, the Pachamama of the Peruvian the Andeans, I suppose the Gaia-centric psychology, complex systems theory.
Tell us a bit more about that, because that's interesting. As we said at the start, I'm quite happy that the conversation that we dive off into all sorts of things.
Is that okay to dive off in that direction?
It is. I've got a few things that as a guide, but that's something that's, I think, is really interesting. So perhaps that just if you carry on exploring that area for us, because I find that really interesting to.
Oh yes, there's a richness there really, and in a way, all points could lead to it. Where to start? The work of McGilchrist, the idea of the left and the right hemisphere, and the different jobs that the left and the right hemisphere do, and basically objective, empirical, evidence-based outcome scientific research lives very much in the left hemisphere. The capacity to be some sort of dispassionate observer of the phenomenon of the world, and control various variables, and do experiments, and anticipate results, and then measure and move our knowledge forwards, and a lot of how we address climate change is through that paradigm. It continues to be through that paradigm, and listen to the science, and we've just had a whole heap of that with how we manage COVID, and now, well, for a long time, of course, it's been the scientists in a way saying, well, yes, it is happening, and it's been the vested interests, saying, no, it isn't, or not while I'm in an advantageous position are we going to acknowledge that it's happening. So yeah, that's the stuff of the left hemisphere. The right hemisphere is much more associated with the big picture, being able to see the whole picture, the complexity of the the interdependency of it all, the interbeing of our experience as a human being, and I think 21st century people who've been brought up in this scientific paradigm that has indeed, progressed us very far in our civilization, but quite close to the edge of the precipice. We've almost lost touch with the ability to see that big picture, and that's where we can take inspiration from the very few indigenous communities that still remain, for whom it's never been in doubt that we interbe with each other. This fierce individualism, this survival, economic survival of the fittest that we've been brought up in, has conditioned the way we operate, and it's quite difficult to get back in touch with our experience of being, if you like, Gaians, Gaian beings, creatures of Mother Earth. And I'm speaking in a way that, not long ago would have been thought to have been wacky, hippy dippy, stuff.
Yeah.
And proper scientists would have no truck with it. We are getting to a point where, yes, I think people at the top of their scientific silos, the top of their left hemisphere trees, would still generally have to be like that for fear of ridicule. But fresher, younger professionals entering the field with courage are being more open to allowing that right hemisphere in to being human in the face of the existential crisis that we're in.
Yeah, it's interesting with regards to the path of science and the, in inverted commas, I would like to say, progress of it, that as we delve deeper and deeper into the material world and find smaller and smaller particles and realize, in the quantum world that nothing actually exists in its own right, it's all relational, then somehow that seems that the science is arriving at this conclusion. I mean, how can anything be in isolation?
Absolutely.
And
well put. Yeah. How can anything be without being in relation to something else, really? And even cosmologists, even whoever came up with the Big Bang explanation, for the very facts of existence, actually, what is that? What is that other than some magic trick, that suddenly nothing exploded into something and nothing. What sort of explanation is that? Bless us all, but I'm not making fun at all. It's as if the natural sciences, the sort of subatomic physics, the pure sciences as such, did have the humility, through Heisenberg and the uncertainty principle, and that if you, even the way you look at something changes the way it appears, that, which oughtn't to be like that for objective science at all, but it is. It just is. And the natural sciences, the pure sciences, seem to have the humility to, in a way, accept that, to just see that it's a paradox and contain that paradox. Whereas the more recent sciences, of which I think of psychology being one, and my early training as a psychologist was, the whole field was so determined to be respected as a proper science. And it's those later sciences that find it hard to let go of that, I think, really. And for me, coming towards the end of my career, not much to lose really, because as a scientist I'm not at all predominant, and I've had a long and sort of quite random working life really, so not much to lose. But I'm in a wonderful position in the scientific community that I'm a part of, and that's the Association of Contextual Behavioural Science, which is this amalgamation of mindfulness, behavior change science, and more recently and very excitingly evolutionary science as well. And this is coming from the field of biology, and there's an exciting alliance of evolutionary science with contextual behavioral science, and I'm excited to introduce complex systems theory more into that organization. And it's challenging, and it's a challenge that's worth stepping up to, I feel,
worth pursuing.
Yeah.
Yeah. There are, I guess, why would be good to discuss, based on based on the stuff we've just chatted through as well. I wanted to talk about how much. I was going to ask you really if you believe that we're all affected by knowledge of climate change, even if we don't attribute it to that, and also I think you mentioned something earlier on about the feelings. I mean, perhaps you could say how often the climate crisis is actually manifesting in the problems that people may present to you and your colleagues these days, and sometimes, and I think one thing that I've learned myself from having mental health issues, that often when we get, so for me personally, when I had from severe-ish problems with anxiety, they were abnormal feelings to me. And looking back, I could probably say that some of them were actually, now I could look back and say, actually, that was perhaps a normal response to situations that were happening. And I feel like people may now be experiencing fear and all sorts of other things, and an anxiety, perhaps physical anxiety symptoms is a manifestation of that fear, and we perhaps see it as abnormal. But surely, my view is that surely this is just a normal presentation of what's happening to us because of imbibing the knowledge and the truth about climate change. A problem this large, can we live unaffected by it? I hope I've kind of put that into some sort of
yes.
right
No,
words,
I really appreciate the question, and wondering how to rise to the challenge of that. I mean, first of all, I have a quotation on my website from Krishnamurti from a long time ago. It's no sign of sanity to be well adjusted to a crazy society.
That's very good.
Yeah. And I'm probably not quite phrasing it right, because it's not. I'm not reading it, but that the essence of it. That in a way, living so out of touch with, if you like, our indigenous nature. Could put it like that, really.
Yeah.
We are, human nature is nature. In human form, and yet we are, so out of touch with it, mostly because of our sapience. We are sentient beings, and most life forms on the planet, are in touch with their experience as a sentient being. It's a given, really. It's sentient, kind of feeling, and to an extent, all living organisms adapt to their environment through, urgent feelings that give them the urge to move towards that which they want to consume and away from that which wants to consume them.
Yeah.
And that is that's ever so the nature of things. But with our capacity for thought and all the progress it's brought, it's also, if you like, brought us a story of who we are and how we are that has progressively divorced us from the natural way of things, and the various spiritual traditions, the Tao or the Dharma, particularly Eastern traditions have, simple and deeply understood words for this, the way of nature, the natural way, really, the natural truth. It's our sapience that has developed for us a kind of a collective organizational story that tells of us being separate individuals in competition with each other for and in competition with the planet itself. The planet is something to be exploited, extracted from, free materials to turn into personal aggrandizement. It's such an alien story to the story of natural peoples. Even the idea of a piece of land being owned by somebody, it makes no sense to people who suddenly found themselves being invaded by people who insisted that their lands, their ancestral lands, were going to belong to the new people. And it's that sapience that keeps us in a way divorced from our natural way of being in a kind of ecological collaboration as part of creation, I suppose. And it's what's led us to be a cancerous growth on the surface of the planet, with our insatiable consumption. And so where am I going with that? Well, I suppose the casualty of that is this psychological imbalance as well, this being divorced from our nature. And as that nature itself, begins to come out with all these warning signs, and the predictability of day following night almost, and where have all the old certainties gone, then not only is the kind of the instability, our psychic instability that is partly to do with being so divorced from our natural way of being. There's not only that, but there's also the deep existential fear that may be too much for us to take on board. And one way we deal with things that are too much to take on board is we become traumatized, and we kind of tuck away the threatening thing into our unconscious, into our shadow reaches, where we're barely aware of it. And I think a lot of people are in that place, are not even aware of how traumatized they're feeling, because the trauma has already happened to them.
Yeah. That's really interesting, and I definitely see. that being the case. And I also have experience from being involved in activism, where I know that there are a lot of people that deeply understand the nature of the existential threat, and have come to experience a reaction to that.
Yeah.
And there is trauma there, and there are people that I know who do know that they are traumatized, but it's still a very difficult situation to live with the knowledge of climate change and not know where we're going.
Yeah.
Uh,
Yeah.
you
Yeah.
know, we personally, my wife and I, we have young children, and um, at times it is difficult to think about, some future point. And partly this sort of taps into something else that I see, where um, our lack of connection with the world and our lack of ability to imagine a better outcome, and perhaps to collectively bring that into being, is kind of our lack of that connection sort of undermines our ability to actually be delivering something beautiful together, a beautiful
Yeah.
alternative
Yeah.
that isn't in line with what our capitalist society might have us do.
Mm, mm.
And actually, um yeah, I've lost my thread now, but
There are so many threads, aren't there?
oh,
Yeah.
it was about kind of people that are acknowledge that we understand
Yeah.
the situation and live with it, and that's a difficult place to be too.
It's a brave place to be. It's a courageous place to be, and the danger of it is burnout, isn't it?
Yeah,
Uh, well, despair. I'm, an activist that I've got a huge amount of admiration for is Joanna Macy, who actually invites us to, with support in group support, to actually open up and allow ourselves to feel our despair, to experience that we can survive it in order to be more resilient in our actions in the future. So I'm not in a way saying that despair is necessarily a bad thing, but I am recognizing that amongst activists, people who are woke to some extent, have woken to this speeding existential crisis, and somehow brave themselves, to face it, felt that anxiety facing it, and I must do something, and that the doing something relieves something of the anxiety. At least I'm doing something. The danger for those individuals is the burnout, and one of the I guess one of the balancing factors for activists is some form of spiritual practice. Some place of inner retreat to a place of strength, in whatever tradition, even one's own, or even sitting under a tree in woods with nobody else around, and just being. Maybe it's nature practice or something like that. Some sort of combination with the activism, I think, is what is very helpful, because there's going to be a wave of it, isn't there, at the end of the week, and we hear the watery sort of anodyne kind of outcomes from COP26. There's going to be a lot of disappointment, hopes dashed, I guess, really, and active hope, as Joanna Macy describes it in her book with Chris Robertson, in a way is hope without attachment to outcome, and that is something of a spiritual quality. Hope without attachment to outcome, because it is, in a way, if we are attached to an outcome, then we're going to be attached, and we're going to take personally the disappointment when it doesn't turn out like that.
Yeah, yeah, that's an interesting place to strive for, isn't it? To not have any attachment to the outcome, because I think it's very conditioned within us
Oh, it
to.
is, isn't it? And I was thinking, just when you mentioned, your young children as well, that, that's such a challenge, But I've got children, that of course there's an attachment in a way, and it's the natural healthy attachment of parent to child to some extent, when we sort of imagine how the future might be if the things we hope for from something like COP26 don't materialize. That's that's an additional challenge to being, without attachment to outcome.
Yeah, I found it in the past hugely beneficial to have it's. I think the conversation that we're having reminds me of, so some of the things that you're describing there, that as very normal human natural reactions in response to certain things, hopes, stimulus, whatever. I think we were saying with presentation of anxiety and symptoms, it's very easy to consider what you're experiencing as not normal, and like you were just saying, to explain that, there's active, as you said, my wife's read Joanna Macy's Active Hope, and I think she's done an online course with a few of our friends. Found it really, really useful.
Yeah,
um
it's a good course.
yeah, she found it wonderful. Yeah. And but to realize that you can't be perfect at it. You can't think, right, I can reach a point where I will always be able to develop hope without attachment. And as you
Oh, I
say,
agree.
we're human. As you just say, we've got children. It's not like that all the time, because day-to-day living doesn't allow us to be in that space all the time. And
No.
just knowing that what we're, time and time again, I think it's really useful to hear that what we experience is normal, is common, is very much shared with a lot of people. I think understanding that you're part of a wider community, even if you're not yet or immediately connected to it, that there are lots of people out there that are experiencing the same as you, that feel exactly the same as you, is somehow very healing.
I agree. Yeah, I agree. I find it really helpful to be working both, in a way, with, I suppose, with both with global organisations and with very much with local organisations as
Okay.
well. And I've been working with uh, in my hometown here in Woodbridge in Suffolk, with the transition network, the transition town group here, since 2008 or so. And for a long time it's felt, again, a bit wacky, on the edge of what most people think is a respectable way to use your time. It's sort of tree huggers. Isn't it funny how that word, incidentally, tree huggers, it has been used for so long as a term of derision, and
Yeah.
yet the actual experience of being in the woods, with yourself and with these beautiful beings all around, and just allowing yourself to put your arms around the trunk of a tree, and just heart to trunk, and just be like that, is just such a beautiful thing. And yet, the sapient part of the large story is derisory. But
Yeah.
where I'm getting to, I suppose, is even locally, just this Saturday just gone, found myself collaborating with two organisations in the local town. One, the Women's Institute, and another, Churches Together, on a march around our town. COP26, raising attention to COP26. People, if you like, this horrendous word normal, whatever that might be, normal people activated and concerned, and it was such a raising of the spirits for all concerned, that march, and being on the streets of this very straight, ordinary kind of town in the midst of a blue rinse kind of East Coast Suffolk. Everybody was lifted by it, and as you say, being amongst people, if you like, who share one's concerns and are also on the same cause, that is a great balm for a troubled soul. And if one is anxious, if one's anxiety leads to actions such as that, then not only is anxiety normal, anxiety is necessary. It's necessary anxiety somehow. To bring such actions about at a local level. And even stalwart citizenry locally, in a way, realizing that the superstars of the green movement, and particularly the politicians with their green tinged speeches, we can't leave it in their hands, bless them. Because they're only human, and they're at the top of their trees, they're top of their silos, their particular trees, their brief period of power and influence that is so fickle and could be so easily lost if they put a word out the wrong way, and if they don't toe their particular party line. They've less freedom to do things than we have at citizen level, really. And I do think any solution it is going to certainly come from active citizen engagement, as well as the slow turning of the people at the top.
Yeah, definitely. It's very true, isn't it, that those people in positions of power have whilst they are in positions where, there's a lot wrong with the democratic system that we have, the parliamentary system, people in individual roles have very narrow boundaries in which they operate, and their power individually to actually enact major change is very, very limited.
And it's surprising when you come across it. A couple of years ago, I was elected onto my town council as a Green councillor, and I'm now also the chair of the Climate and Ecological Emergency Committee. But I have a lot more, if you like, leeway and agility at this bottom level of local of government, local government, right at the very bottom level. And it's a paradox that climb up from local to district and then to county level, and then I guess we're off into sort of parliamentary politics after that. But going up a couple of levels to county level, the party line becomes so much more important, and the ability to move becomes so constricted, really. And this is where structurally, we are all products of the neoliberal kind of the agenda, the kind of socio-economic form of exchange, really. We were born into it. We've grown up through it. Wherever we are in it, we've got our little niche, and perhaps always, and always looking up and wondering how we might climb a little, and noticing the struggles of people down below. And how, to even be able to imagine a different story of how human beings might collaborate is hard work, because that's not the way it is. That's not the way. And again, this is going back into how sapience drives us. It both, it allows us our cleverness, but it also keeps us very much in the place we think we are in.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, that's really interesting. Yeah. Another question for you. When we're, I guess, from yours and your experience of your colleagues and acquaintances that are that do similar work to yourselves, what's your view about the way that we continually imbibe negative information from, and what I mean is from, like, there's lots of information in news in general, but if we tune in to negative news about climate change, and obviously that news, it's necessary that message reaches people, and that more and more people understand it, because that can probably drive collective behavioural change. What I personally found was that when I first started, in fact, it's a little bit like you say, having had a real tangible physical feeling of anxiety come to light again in me, I don't know, 2-3 years ago, when I first started to engage with Extinction Rebellion and find out some more about the truth of climate change. It's what really drove me to want to do something about it.
Yeah.
But I've then come to realize, and I believe this is a sensible approach, that having really understood where we are and a lot of the statistics about climate change and global warming and the global temperature increase and some of the effects that can bring about, and understanding the problem of global inequality. And if you've taken that on board and you're dealing with it and you're as active as you possibly can be, and if you are, I'm not trying to say that I'm perfect at this, but if you're striving to try and be in connection with other people that share that same lived experience, then I don't believe that it's healthy to continue to tune into the continual hammering that you would get from mentally from the bad news being constantly delivered at you without you choosing to tune into it. I don't know if psychologically is that the truth of things? Have I sort of framed that how it actually is, that if we allow ourselves to be completely open to that much trauma, bad news, whatever you want to call it, that it's actually harmful in the long run?
Yeah, good question. And it reminds me really of that metaphor of hiding your head in the sand, which is usually a sort of, it's usually a cautionary metaphor, isn't it? That you're hiding your head in the sand. In other words, you're not taking reality in. But if you happen to be in a sandstorm, then perhaps sticking your head underground is not a bad idea till the wind blows over. So just a bit of a playful mess around with that metaphor. But if you have well educated yourself and really open the mind to the many kind of emergent kind of knowledge sphere that is growing. The concept of climate justice is pretty new.
Yeah.
The concept of going in humility to the few existing, what little diversity is left beyond the capitalist consumerist model. In other words, the indigenous psychologies. Going in humility to learn from there, when the savages have been ridiculed for decades and centuries during empires being built, and you know, the usual way of doing things
Yeah.
developed. Um, if we have opened to that and we've taken in the news, then I at some point I think we also have to manage how much more is coming in. A lot at the moment, you know. There's a maelstrom of it with COP26, and you know, to some extent, it's important that that's coming out for, if you like, the general population. You know, it's quite important, but whether activists need to keep hearing this on every news show, I don't think so. You know, I think this is another route to burnout, really. I first discovered this in the early 80s during the Falklands, the so-called Falklands crisis, and at the time, you know, I was somewhat politically charged as a young fella, and utterly outraged about what was happening in the Falklands, and taking in news from every source. And but there was one activist friend of mine who was doing it even more, and I, thank goodness, I saw how it was damaging him, and just realized in time how much it was damaging
Okay.
me. I knew I didn't like what was going on, and you know, it's the last time I read a newspaper in 1982.
Okay.
I used to read the Guardian and the New Statesman avidly for every bit of news on the Falklands crisis, and I just stopped. You know, I knew I was going to get, you know, news on it anyway, and I knew there wasn't a great deal I could do about this conflict miles away and at my age, and so on and so forth. But I knew where I felt the wrong to be. But hearing more and more about it, my friend could tell me what class of battleships were being sunk, what aeroplanes were being used, everything. It was too much. So that's a long old answer to your question. I don't think we need to lash ourselves with repetitive bad news.
Yeah. Yeah. It seems like there's a place of almost like you need to keep almost I found like you need to keep up to date with things, and
Mm.
you and some of that I think is just driven by the availability of media, because
Mm.
you know, when you're used to the fact as a um if when you're used to the fact that you can go and find the information, you can go and find a news story related to your interests within seconds,
Yes.
and you've done it, you know, you've practiced that many times, and it's very easy to go to be almost automatically go, I'll just have a look at the headlines on the
Yeah.
Guardian,
Oh,
see what's
yeah.
happening on COP. There's an example of what I've kept doing in the last 10 days right
Yes.
there.
Yeah. It's there for me too. Yeah. You know, I feel that, and you know, through this COP period, you know, I've noticed myself being drawn to the headlines, and you know, consistently disappointed in a way by what I hear, and yet, you know, there's a sort of a certain fascination, isn't there? Really, and I attempt to manage it, and I do have I do have my mindfulness practice that, you know, that I sort of go to, and
Yeah.
you know, just in a way disengage from it, and that, you know, that's helpful. That's replenishing, rejuvenating.
You have quite a structured practice that you follow then. Oh,
Yeah, yes, fairly. I'm no great. I've not got a great deal of self-discipline naturally, but you know, I've been practicing for 35 years or so. So it's easy to reach for it, and I know where it is. You know, and I know how to drop into that sort of spaciousness, that capacity to come out of minding about things, and just feel into sentience. Yeah, that's an important aspect. Yeah. And it's important, for the trauma management too. I think, to really know what's going on in the embodied experience. It is helpful when the minding about stuff is really gripping us too tightly.
Yeah. Is it the case for any individual looking to sort of develop some sort of spiritual practice that might help, that might be meaningful to them? I suppose is meaningful to them the key there. I guess it's not going to be a prescribed, you must, if you do this and
Oh,
this. I
no,
feel like there must be an element of tapping into what feels right for anybody, for an individual to discover what matters to them, um, and building a practice around it. Is that
Oh yes,
right? Yeah.
I'm sure you're the nail on the head there. Yes, it needs to be a personal discovery. What actually works for you. It might be singing. You might come to some deep spiritual place, through singing in a choir. It could be planting trees. That's that. My experience is that can feel, quite a connected and spiritual practice. And I'm tree warden of two local
Oh,
parishes.
lovely.
That's a wonderful opportunity again to work with groups of people on doing something like that, and it is quite meditative. The caring for saplings, and seeing how last years have done, and checking in with them, and yeah. Those, I think those sorts of things, and working on an organic farm, in a kind of community assisted agriculture project, which requires a couple of hours a week, helping out on the farm, just doing farm labouring stuff, which is, actually, we might, all of us think we're far too sophisticated to do that, and pity the immigrants won't come back and pick our vegetables for us, and etc. etc.
Yeah.
But actually, it's a privilege, and when you're doing
Yeah.
it with a community of people, growing food for yourself, something like that is quite close to a spiritual practice, and it does feel like I'm doing something. I'm being the change I would like to see, even if I can't, effect this big change in the world. Then I'm being that change personally.
Yeah. I think literally getting your hands dirty in those ways is really, really healthy and brings us directly in
Mm.
contact with the earth, with nature, doesn't it? It's very gratifying and very healing. Near to us, we have an area that we've planted some trees on, and we did it.
Wonderful.
We
Mm.
did it as a social thing with the people that we'd formed a local Extinction Rebellion group with, and the little
Oh,
network that we had. So it
yeah.
was a wonderful antidote. Is that the right word? It was a wonderful right step when we'd been together for a little while and involved in the issues to actually get together. We put up a little gazebo. Everyone bought a bit of food. There was hot drinks while the tree planting was going on, and it just felt right. No other way of describing it. It just one of those times where
Mm.
it just felt like it was something that we are supposed to be doing.
Oh, it's
Both
precious. Oh,
both the tree planting, the connection with nature, and that connection with people around that event.
mm.
And we're lucky enough that some friends of ours have got a really relatively large rewilding project going on just about a couple of miles away from where we live, and they're regularly getting groups of people in to do tree planting, and it sparked off a little growth in smaller landowners getting together and creating a bigger joined up approach to what they're doing here,
Yeah,
and
yeah.
that's lovely. And
Mm,
but again, growing things, our son is almost 5, and in lockdown, we created more vegetable patches in our garden,
yeah. Mm,
and getting him involved in that, and I still find it incredible. The just nature is just remarkable in lots and lots of ways, but just growing your own vegetables, it blows my mind every time how you can plant a tiny seed
yeah.
and grow carrots from it, or you can plant a potato and grow many potatoes from
Mm,
one.
mm.
It's just it, and you really, even if you don't spend too long thinking about that, just to kind of tap into that the wonder of the natural world is both fascinating and really rewarding, isn't it?
I'm just looking at both our faces. We're creased in gentle smile as we speak of this. There's a feeling of joy as we recreate it in our minds, and that's that's good news. This is news that we need to keep hearing. Even if it's our own news, just rehearsing it in our minds. That's good news to listen into. And if there is a special place for any of us that we have developed that we like, in a way, like to go and be in and watch the passage of the seasons, there's again, there's a connection in spirit with the spirit of nature. To watch a small patchland of woods, go through its changes over the seasons, and then being in touch with more perhaps with the Celtic and pre-Christian and pagan the earth festivals, the equinoxes, the solstices and the cross quarter festivals, just as a means of being in touch with the cycles of the earth. Again, re-indigenizing ourselves informally, just a little, not like we're stealing anybody else's traditions. It's almost like we're kind of recreating some traditions for ourselves. Those sorts of things, and the ceremony that you can sometimes bring to that, and in the community. And it sounds like your XR movement locally has really grounded itself in some of that stuff, and that's great. I hang out with the XR folks here a bit sometimes. I do some de-escalation uh,
Okay.
locally, and it you know it's great to be with that passionate energy. And it can often burst into a bit of factionalism and sort of disunity as well, in the way that movements on the left have notoriously fought with each other more than they have with the opposition, on some small matter of approach. But I think if you're doing kind of social gathering stuff like that, it protects the usness. That's it. It's
Yeah.
usness. It's this phenomenon of usness that's part of the new story that is yet to be kind of written. But if we are to evolve beyond this time in human cultural evolution, then it will be according to a new story. And one of the components of that new story is a regular revisiting of the phenomenon of usness, because we're so steeped in the story of separation and competition.
Yeah, that's really lovely. It's very, yeah, very, very true. There's a real deep truth to what you were saying there. I believe. Yeah, we locally in our group, we have the group that we were involved in, the XR group, kind of almost died and was reborn either side. Well, I can't say that we're anywhere like out of the pandemic yet, but
Mm.
um, I guess when the pandemic started, to the point where lots of people were vaccinated and started to mingle a bit, there was a spell where the group kind of fell away, and we're constantly sort of talk about the fact that we need to have a current of the well-being, the regenerative culture needs to be active and always there underlying everything we do. And we feel frustrated personally at home when it's so easy to overlook it, because and it's probably, I think, as you've really demonstrated tonight, it's probably necessary in all our lives personally, and and I think it's easy to overlook in our personal lives, and it's easy to overlook when we come together in a group. And because we're so determined to in our determination to be active and to try and fix the problems, we often overlook the things that will make us probably best able to deal with the problems.
Oh, well put. Yeah. The approach that I've spoken about, the approach to therapy is called acceptance and commitment therapy. It's known as ACT, and the mother organisation is known as the Association of Contextual Behavioural Science. It's sort of a kind of, as I say, a bit more of a kind of a global organisation. About 10,000 folks altogether. I just want to, I think I've lost my thread, but I'll just pick up another one.
Sure.
Something big and new that's growing within the larger organization is something called prosocial group design. And it is, you probably know the work of Joe Brewer, do you? The regenerative communities.
It's not a name that I recognize, actually.
I think his work's mostly based in Colombia. Joe Brewer, regenerative communities, I think.
Okay.
Yeah. But they've taken up using prosocial group design, and it, amongst other things, it works with. I suppose it's working with some of the ideas that come from Eleanor Ostrom. She's Norwegian. Social scientist, but she got Nobel Prize, I think, in 2008 for what she called core design principles. She studied those, if you like, mostly indigenous communities where perhaps different tribes or different villages managed a common resource successfully. The idea of the commons sort of disappeared for us in the 16th century, really, with the Enclosures Act, and the idea of all human beings having a plot of land where they can grow their veggies and have their look after their animals, a little small holding, if you like. It had gone, and it was the beginning. We went into serfdom and so on and so forth. The long kind of history stuff. But in other cultures where the empire went to, discovered indigenous communities living alongside each other, where they managed, for example, a lake without overfishing it and without competing and one village taking over from another. There was a sort of an informal structure to groups managing the commons. You find it in mountains where a lot of different villages depend upon glacier water, coming down, and I witnessed that myself in the Hindu Kush region. Without knowing anything about this, but in younger days, witnessing that just by moving a few stones, water could be sent to different places on the long, the long valley down towards the flatlands. And I with limited language abilities, I tried to say, well, who organises this? And we do was the answer, and I was looking for some sort of central organisation principle. No, it was just a centuries old kind of culturally evolved way of doing it fairly and sustainably. And of course, we've completely lost track of that with centralized government control. And we it's an unbroken tradition that's been completely broken for us, and we have to kind of relearn it. And Eleanor Ostrom discovered 8 core design principles, and groups that have some semblance of these tend to be able to collaborate with each other to manage the commons. So in my work on town council, I'm trying to introduce that to how do we manage the parks and the sort of common spaces that the local council manages on behalf of the citizenry. How can we get citizens involved in active management and being hands on, doing the work, weeding the beds, planting things and so on and so forth. Exciting, but alien to the current culture. So it really takes some doing. But the evolutionary science bit of it, I want to just speak about, because this could be a good resource perhaps to pop into the to the resources that you put in afterwards.
Yeah.
The work of Professor David Sloan Wilson. He's an evolutionary biologist. Many publications in the scientific field, but a really important publication is his first novel, and it's entitled Atlas Hugged.
Okay.
Atlas Hugged, and it's a play on the title of the book. I think it was in 1962, published by Ayn Rand, which is generally thought of as being a real kind of thought influencer on the neoliberal creed.
I think I frowned when you said the name. And
Ayn Rand and Brandon somebody or another. It basically it's a novel that renders ethical personal accumulation of wealth. The novel, I suppose, was received with relief by aggressive entrepreneurs, in the advertising industry. It was actually mentioned in that Netflix thing, the Mad Men. Did it come from there? I was interested to hear Ayn Rand's book was being passed around. Oh, you should read this. It was very formative of early earlier times when our socioeconomic model kind of went out of control, really, of anybody and anything, and developed its own kind of evolutionary capacity, I suppose. And so David's novel is an antidote, and within that introduces, I suppose, pro-social design principles through the format of a novel of a kind of a family member of the Ayn Rand. It's in novel form, but it's clear what it's mimicking. But this young person comes across various mentors and becomes inspired by sort of dismantling what his grandma Ayn Rand had put into place, and a mechanism in a way for doing it through concerted citizen action, a kind of the invention of a new story. It's a good read. It has hope in it. Other people who are very much on the news story, Charles Eisenstein, again, speaks well, I feel, about the idea of we needing a new organizational story to guide, shape our ways of exchange in a different manner. And that's going back, I suppose, now to why it's so important that there is a diversity still. There are a few small pockets of human activity that operate on different principles, like Ubuntu and then the Pachamama, those sorts of ideas, and James Lovelock's Gaia theory, the idea of the Earth being a living, sentient, self-organizing being, an organism.
Yeah, it's a powerful, it is a powerful story, isn't it? And yeah, um, it seems like we're rediscovering that truth, or well, some of us are
Mm.
on that path, and I think it's going to be more and more important as we progress.
Mm.
I wanted to, in fact, I've kind of got two things written down. That's really one, I suppose, but it was to do with we talked about our need with regard, as we've talked a lot about tonight, with regards to looking ahead at the climate crisis and the need to fix issues, but also it goes back. I guess I just want to return, perhaps at the end of the conversation, because I realise we've gone well over an hour. It's like, so thank you for that.
Yeah. Mm.
The need to live alongside the issues that we face and the trouble that causes us, and the need to kind of just be with what we're experiencing, and also how that links to, it seems like there's a bit of a paradox, because it seems like we need to, and this might not be how it actually is, but from the way that I could best frame it was, it seems like we need to both allow the feelings that we might experience in relation to the knowledge of the existential crises. We need to allow those feelings to sit with us, as well as seemingly taking swift action. So it seems like a bit of a paradox. Like, we need to be really active and we're drawn to fix things, but we also really need to do work on ourselves. Is that I don't know whether that's actually come across as the question, but
it gives me a useful kind of platform to come from there.
Yeah.
The approach in the acceptance and commitment therapy model is very much informed by our values, about what does a human being value, because if we really know what a human being values, then we can help them aim towards that with behavior change. Any behavior change that we might seek to impose upon somebody would seem deeply unethical. But when somebody is clear about what they value, and they tell you, then if you have the skills as a practitioner to enable behavior changes in the service of those values, then you can feel like you are on an ethical path in trying to help this person, because they've said that's the direction they want their lives to go. And how you define values can be complex depending on with the audience that you're talking to. But one particular succinct way of defining our values is qualities of being and doing. Values are qualities of being and doing. And there is, there's a place for both of those in our activism. There's the how do we be with what we do? How do we be with ourselves? How do we be with our, if you like, our existential anxiety? There's an aspect of what do we do about it? Does our anxiety, the healthy aspect of anxiety perhaps drives us to collaborate with others and draw attention to what we see, and find the best ways we can be together in groups to work together to mitigate or at least to the deep adaptation agenda, for example, of Jeremy Bendel and associates, actually planning for for greater resilience in local communities, and readying ourselves and drawing up the wagons and in a circle, whatever, that might be where the anxiety takes us. But there's also the quality of being, and your local XR group has got some of that, in the quality of being together, and the joy that you found, and the joy that creased across the smile on your face when you were talking about planting trees together. It was it was an activity, but it was being together, and it was being it was being creative. So qualities of being and doing, and deep acceptance. This is one of the qualities that we perhaps need to bring to some of our more difficult feelings. Accepting that they're there. Accommodating is another way of looking at it. Simply, and it just in a single breath it can be done. Just a sudden sharp stab of anxiety, accompanied by the thought that's either provoked it or been provoked by it. Who knows which way round it is? They're so interlinked. The embodied experience and the minding aspect. It's a sort of a bit of a false dichotomy, anyway. But being able to accommodate that and bringing to it a kind of a kindly curiosity, a self-compassion, a deep compassion towards the feeling and towards the feeler of the feeling. Simply bringing kindness to how it feels, how we feel, how others around us, bringing those qualities too when people tip over a bit and, kind of lose it. And can we just witness and be kind and make room for it? Because a group, according to the evolutionary principles, groups, and there's the technical term for it is multi-level selection. Cultural evolution it is not limited to how individuals evolve. It's how groups evolve, and how groups of groups evolve as well, in ever increasing levels of complexity, and the extent to which we can evolve as groups that have learnt to be together. We are moving towards into being, in our best endeavours.
Yeah,
we're moving towards that beautiful quality of into being that Eisenstein speaks about, and also the Zen master Thich Nhat Hanh, who I think originated that term. Joanna Macy talks about it as well. This quality of into being. Not just at one group level, the workshop level, but lots of groups, and how perhaps different XR activity groups can merge into a regional group, and treat each other with the same sort of accommodation and kindly curiosity. It can grow an into being. And perhaps it builds a sort of centre of gravity that attracts others towards.
Yeah, that it's it's. Thank you. It was a good answer, as ever. It was a really good answer. Thank you, Ryan.
I'm glad to hear that. I've sort of forgotten what the question was.
Well, I think that's how these podcasts always go, and I think that's perfect. Is there anything else that you wanted to say? Because I'm aware we've gone over the. Sometimes this happens, and I thank you for your time. It's been fantastic, fascinating, and really lovely. It's been a beautiful conversation. I really enjoyed it. Is there anything else you wanted to sort of bring to it?
Just to say that's mutual. The opportunity to talk, with like-minded people on these topics is really important, I think, for all of us. And we need to make opportunities to speak more about these things, and share our enthusiasms and share our insights. And it's nice to have that opportunity to do that.
Hey, it's my pleasure. I'm really, really grateful to you for being here. Yeah, yeah.
Great stuff, Mark.
Thank you, Martin. I hope we get the chance to talk again. Really like that. It was another one of those. I seem to end everyone by saying, "Well, I could have spoken with you for double the time that So
I must say something about you, Mark. I think here,
well, that's very, very kind of you.
how does this go out? This goes out as a sound file, does it, or is it as
it
a video or a vlog or?
Yeah, sound podcast. I publish them every couple of weeks. This will probably be there's one due out Friday this week. This will probably I think if I'm remembering correctly what I've already got sort of recorded. I've just sort of I had a spell where I kind of published all the ones that I had, and I had a little bit of a gap, and I've just started again. So I think this will be roughly 2 weeks' time, just a little bit more than 2 weeks. This one will go out. I'd like it to go out fairly soon because we've talked about COP quite a lot in there, and I think it'll be quite timely. So, but I'll let you know. I'll send you a couple of links as to where people can access it, and if you've got networks that you think that it's worth sharing in, however you want to do that, I'd be very grateful. But that's entirely up to you. Sure. And if you've got, as we discussed, if you've got any resources, links, I've scribbled a few things down, but please hit me with a load of information if you want me to include that in the notes.
Links to things, gladly. Yeah. The book, incidentally, Atlas Hugged, is offered on a kind of gift economy basis. So you can just download it for donations. It's well worth a read. It really is. Yeah.
I'll definitely be downloading that. That sounds excellent. Yeah.
I'll send you the link.
Great.
Okay. Yeah.
Thank you for listening to that episode. Let me know what you think about it, and let me know if there's a guest that you think might be good to chat with on a future episode. Do have a look at the show notes. There are some links in there to the things that we discussed in this episode. And also do me a favour and rate the podcast, please, if you can. Certainly on Apple Podcasts, you've got the ability to rate a podcast up to 5 stars. So let's not bother with 1, 2, 3 or 4 and just a 5-star rating, please, if you can. Write me a little review as well, if you can. And you can always get in touch via beyonddayzero podcast@gmail.com or follow us on Instagram @beyonddayzero podcast. See you next time.